Although the people of Russia gained little, the rulers gained mightily in power. They built up a giant war machine, looking forward to the day when their flag would fly over the entire world.
Host 16-1-2026, 22-03. In March 1968, Nguyen Base, South Vietnam, American Special Forces advisors watched Australian SAS soldiers prepare for jungle patrol. The Aussies carried L1A1 rifles, but something was wrong. Sun-off barrels, cut-down stocks. To the Americans, these weapons looked butchered, like someone had taken a hacksaw to military equipment in a garage at 2 a.m. Those idiots are going to get themselves killed. One Green Beret reportedly muttered. Within 3 months, those same Green Berets would be begging to learn from those idiots. Because the Australians were not just modifying their rifles, they were solving a problem that was killing Americans every single day. A problem the U.S. military had thrown millions of dollars and thousands of lives at without success. By early 1968, MACV-SOG, the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, the most classified American unit in Vietnam, had what intelligence officers called the prairie fire problem. Reconnaissance teams were going into the jungle and vanishing, not from enemy action, from detection. The numbers were brutal. In I Corps, the northernmost military region of South Vietnam, recon teams had an average lifespan of 6 missions before catastrophic contact. Crossbar operations into Laos had a 100% contact rate. Every single patrol was discovered, tracked, and engaged. The statistics that circulated among Special Forces officers were classified for a reason. They were terrifying. Some SOG units had casualty rates exceeding 300% annually. Read that again. 300%. The entire unit turned over 3 times in a year from deaths and wounds. That is not a unit. That is a meat grinder with a flag on it. The problem was simple to describe, impossible to solve. The Viet Cong could hear American patrols coming from hundreds of meters away. It was not lack of training. Green Berets went through some of the most intensive infiltration training in the world. It was not lack of courage. SOG operators were among the most decorated soldiers in American history. It wasn't lack of equipment. The U.S. was deploying experimental sensors, modified weapons, even early night vision technology. The problem was the jungle itself and how 2 different militaries understood it. American doctrine in 1968 emphasized firepower and communication. A standard SOG recon team carried an ANPR C-25 radio weighing 23 pounds. They carried M16 rifles, 20 inches of barrel, 39 in overall length. They carried enough ammunition to sustain contact, 400 to 600 rounds per man, plus grenades, smoke, and demo charges. A 6-man team moved through the jungle carrying over 400 LOB of equipment, and the jungle heard every ounce of it. The metallic clink of ammunition pouches, the electronic hiss of radio squelch, the scrape of a 39-in rifle barrel against bamboo, the snap of branches under boots designed for temperate forests, not tropical undergrowth. Lieutenant Colonel John Singlobe, SOG's Chief of Operations, later wrote, "We were sending our best men into an environment where they had every disadvantage except courage. The enemy was quieter, lighter, more patient, and above all, invisible. We were loud, heavy, impatient, and obvious. The U.S. military tried everything. They deployed people sniffer, sensors that could detect ammonia from human perspiration. They tried infrared detection, acoustic sensors. They spent $3.7 million on experimental low-noise radios. Nothing worked. The VC still heard them coming. They tried smaller teams, 4 men instead of 6, different movement formations, counter-tracking techniques learned from Native American advisors. The casualty rates barely changed. By March 1968, senior commanders were quietly discussing whether recon operations should be suspended entirely in certain areas. The cost was simply too high. Then 120 Australians from 3 Squadron Special Air Service Regiment arrived at Nuatat. Captain Jim Wallace watched the Australians unload their equipment at Nuatat with growing confusion. Wallace was a veteran Green Beret advisor who host 1601, Ringwen 26, 22.03, had done 3 tours in Southeast Asia. He knew jungle warfare. He knew what worked, and what the Australians were carrying did not work. It could not possibly work. Their rifles were wrong. The L1A1 self-loading rifle was already considered inferior to the M16 by American standards, heavier, bigger, harder to maneuver. But the Australians had made it worse. They had sawn the barrels down from 21 in to 17 in. They had removed the full stock and replaced it with a skeleton frame. The weapons looked like post-apocalyptic props. "The barrel is too short for accuracy," Wallace told an Australian warrant officer. "You are losing velocity, losing range." "Why would you do that?" The Australian warrant officer, Ron Exton, just smiled. "Because we are not here to shoot at targets 300 meters away, mate." But it was not just the rifles. Everything about the Australians seemed wrong to American eyes. They wore Australian patterned camouflage that looked too dark for the jungle until you realized they moved in shadows, not sunlight. They carried half the ammunition Americans did. They had no radios on most patrols. They wore canvas and rubber jungle boots that looked like they would fall apart in a week. They moved in 5-man patrols, not 6 or 8. Most disturbing of all, they moved slowly, painfully, incomprehensibly slowly. American doctrine emphasized getting off the LZ landing zones were danger, so you moved fast to put distance between yourself and potential observers. The Australians did the opposite. They would land, then sit motionless for up to an hour, just listening. Then they would move perhaps 50 and sit again. They are going to get overrun sitting still like that. Captain Wallace told his CEO, "The VC will have them triangulated within minutes." But orders came down from MACV. Let the Aussies do it their way. They were Commonwealth allies. The Australians had learned their craft from the British SAS in Malaya and Borneo conflicts where patience and stealth had proven more valuable than firepower. Now they were teaching those lessons to their American allies. They had earned the right to their own methods, even if those methods look suicidal. But here is what the Americans did not know yet, and would not understand for 3 more months. Those strange methods were about to save lives. The first joint operation was a disaster from the American perspective. It was April 15th, 1968. The mission: locate and identify a suspected VC base camp in the Hat Dish area, 10 kilometers northeast of Nuat. 2 patrols. 1 American SOG team, 1 Australian SAS patrol. Different insertion points. Same objective area. Whoever found the camp first would call in the other for a joint assessment. The American team call sign Python was a veteran SOG unit. 6 men led by an experienced sergeant. They carried full combat loads, M16s, 600 rounds per man, PRC-25 radio, claymores, grenades, medical supplies. Total weight per man, 87 lbs. The Australian patrol call sign Ferret was led by Sergeant Terry O. Farrell. 5 men, L1A1 rifles with the cut-down barrels, 200 rounds per man. No radio, minimal equipment. Total weight per man, 52 pounds. Python inserted at Oro 6000 hours. By 0615, they had moved 400 mVs from the LZ and were making steady progress toward the objective. Standard tactical movement 100 man torn. Security halts every 15 minutes. Rotating point man every 30 minutes. Ferret inserted at 0630 hours. By Zur 7, 31 hours later, they had moved approximately 75 km. Captain Wallace was monitoring from the TOC Tactical Operations Center. He shook his head. The Aussies are going to be out there for a week. At this rate, by 1400 hours, Python was within 500 meters of the suspected camp location. They had made excellent time, moved tactically, maintained good noise discipline by American standards. At 1410 hours, they triggered an ambush. The VC had been tracking them for 2 hours. 3 flanking positions, pre-sighted kill zone, 20-plus enemy fighters. Pythons. Shost. Dowasya. 2220 Caesar 2203. Point man died instantly. The team's radio man took shrapnel in the first volley. They fought their way out barely with 2 dead, 3 wounded, and 0 intelligence on the enemy camp. The extraction helicopter took fire. The area was now compromised. The mission was scrubbed. Ferret Patrol heard the contact from 3 kilometers away. They froze in place, waited 30 minutes, then continued their impossibly slow advance. By 18,800 hours, 12 hours after insertion, Ferret was overlooking the VC base camp. They had approached from a different angle than Python, moving so slowly that they had actually stepped over a VC sentry trail without the guards hearing them. Sergeant O. Farrell later reported they had been within 10 meters of an enemy position for over 40 minutes, waiting for a guard rotation. They observed the camp for 6 hours, counted structures, identified weapons positions, photographed key leaders with a telephoto camera. At Obo Numau hours the next morning, they withdrew along the exact route they had come in, moving backwards for the first 200 miles. They exited the jungle at 16,000 hours, 24 hours after insertion with photographs, intelligence, and 0 enemy contact. When Captain Wallace saw the intelligence dump, his first reaction was disbelief. There is no way they got that close. His second reaction after confirmation from aerial reconnaissance, how the hell did they get that close? What happened next would make Captain Wallace question everything he had learned in 3 tours of duty. May 6, 1968, Route 328, 2 kilometers north of Binba village. An Australian SAS patrol call sign, Bravo 2, had been tracking a VC supply column for 16 hours. They had identified the column at dusk the previous day, approximately 40 VC, carrying supplies from a cache area to forward positions. The Australians had done something that baffled American doctrine. They had paralleled the enemy column throughout the night, never engaging, just tracking. By dawn, Bravo 2's patrol commander, Sergeant Barry Tiny Peters, had formed a hypothesis. The VC were following a predictable route. They would rest during daylight hours, then move again at dusk. And they were sloppy. Probably militia, not regular NVA. Peters positioned his 5-man patrol along a likely ambush site, not where the VC were, but where they would be. Then the Australians did something no American unit had the patience for. They waited for 11 hours. Sergeant Peters had been in the same position for 7 hours when a bull ant crawled into his boot. He could feel it biting, stinging. The pain shot up his calf like hot needles. He did not move because 15 meters away, a VC soldier was smoking a cigarette, rifle slung, completely unaware he was being watched. Peters let him finish the cigarette. Let him field strip it and scatter the paper. Let him walk away. Then, and only then, he repositioned his rifle. No movement, no noise, no radio traffic. They had selected their position so carefully that they did not need to shift or adjust. They simply became part of the terrain. At 1640 hours, the VC column moved into the kill zone. The Australian ambush doctrine was different from American practice. U.S. ambushes emphasized maximum firepower. Claymores, automatic weapons, grenades, everyone fires. The goal was to devastate the enemy in the first 5 seconds, then assault through. The Australians did something else entirely. Peters let the first 10 VC pass through his position, let them walk right past, close enough to touch. Then he and his men opened fire from point-blank range, but only with precision shots, not automatic fire. The cut-down L1 A1S at ranges of 15 to 20 mmars were devastating. The heavier 7.62mm round, even with reduced velocity, had far more stopping power than the M16's 5.56 meters. In 8 seconds, Peters and his team killed 14 VC. The remaining 30 scattered into the jungle. This is where the Australian doctrine showed its genius. Instead of pursuing, which would mean moving fast, making noise, potentially walking into a counter, host, 1.26-22-3 ambush, the Australians remained perfectly still. The cut-down rifles meant they could track targets while barely moving their bodies. They picked off 6 more VC, who made the mistake of thinking the firing had stopped. The VC never knew what hit them. More importantly, they never knew where it came from. Total Australian ammunition expenditure, 97 rounds. Total VC casualties, 20 confirmed killed. Estimated 8 to 10 wounded. Australian casualties, 0. But here is what stunned the American advisors who saw the after-action report. The surviving VC fled in the wrong direction toward an Australian blocking position that Peters had radioed for. Another 8 VC were captured, from first shot to last, 4 minutes. Total VC casualties or captures, 28 out of 40. Intelligence recovered. Supply manifests, unit designations, tunnel locations. And the VC still did not know exactly where the ambush had been positioned. An American SOG team had conducted a similar ambush 3 weeks earlier on Route 2, 30 kilometers north. Similar target VC supply column. The Americans had killed 12 enemy, but taken 2 casualties of their own when the VC counter-attacked. The Americans had expended over 800 rounds of ammunition, called in gunship support, and had to be extracted under fire. The comparison reached MACV headquarters in Saigon. General Creighton Abrams, commander of MACV, personally requested Australian SAS provide cross-training to selected American Special Forces units. Captain Wallace was among the first to volunteer. 3 days after the Binba operation, warrant officers stood in the new briefing room, explaining what the Australians had been doing all along. Captain Wallace sat in the front row, taking notes for the first time in years. "Your M16 is 39 in long," Extone said, laying an American rifle on the table. "In thick jungle, you are moving through vegetation every meter. Every time this barrel touches a branch, it makes noise. Every time you push through bamboo, 39 in of metal scrapes against it." He laid his modified L1A1 next to it. 33 in total length. 6 in does not sound like much, but we counted once over 200 contact points in a 100-meter movement. We have cut that by 40%, maybe 50%, because the shorter barrel means we can move it vertically more often away from vegetation. A Green Beret captain raised his hand. "But you are losing muzzle velocity. You are losing accuracy past 200 mm. "Correct," Extone said. "We have lost about 150 FT per second. Our effective range is now 250 instead of 300. How many contacts in jungle terrain happen past 250 men?" The room was silent. Everyone knew the answer. Almost none. Most contacts happen within 50 men, many within 20. The VC and NVA are not standing in open fields. Exton continued. They are in jungle that limits sight lines to 30, maybe 50 millimeters. We have optimized for the environment we are actually fighting in, not the environment we wish we were fighting in. 2 weeks after that briefing, an American sergeant named Rodriguez tried the Australian method on a reconnaissance patrol. He moved at 30 mph, used the heel roll step had demonstrated, taped every metal surface on his equipment. He got within 8 meters of a VC command post. 8 meters close enough to hear them arguing about American patrol patterns. He photographed documents through a window. When he reported back, Wallace pulled him aside. "That is impossible." Rodriguez just smiled. "That is what I thought too, sir." But the rifles were only the most visible modification. The Australian philosophy went deeper. "You lads move at 100 mph, explained. "We move at 25 to 40 mph. "You think that is slow? We think you are sprinting through an environment where patience is survival." He pulled out a sound meter. "Your PRC-25 radio has an electronic hiss at 40 dB when squelch. Breaks in a quiet jungle that is audible at 200 mph. Your equipment makes noise, nylon scraping metal touching metal. Your standard Asu boots have cleated soles that catch vegetation." He demonstrated the walking technique. In American doctrine, you step ball of foot first, then heel. How humans naturally walk on hard surfaces. In jungle, the Australian stepped heel first, feeling for twigs and debris, then rolling the foot down. Slower, much slower, but silent. "We are moving so slowly that we can place each step deliberately," said. An American SOG veteran spoke up. "We do noise discipline training. We understand fieldcraft." "I know you do," Exton said, and his tone was not condescending. It was respectful. "And your training is excellent. But you are training for a different mission. You are training to get to an objective, accomplish it, and extract. You are training for speed and violence of action. We are training to become part of the environment, to be invisible." He showed them the Australian loadout. No metal canteen cups. They rang when touched. Cloth tape over every metal surface. No dog tags. Ammunition in canvas pouches, not metal. Our equipment noise at walking speed is about 15 dB. Your gear is closer to 35 dB. In a silent jungle, that difference means the VC hear you at 400 meters instead of 75 meters. "But what about fire support?" someone asked. "What about extraction?" "You are not carrying radios. 1 man in 5 carries a radio." Exxon said, "But we very rarely use it, because if we are doing our job correctly, we are never in contact. Our mission is reconnaissance, not engagement. We find the enemy. We count him. We photograph him. We report his position. And we never let him know we are there." The numbers backed him up. Between April and June 1968, Australian SAS patrols completed 87% of their reconnaissance missions, successfully compared to the American average of 43%. Only 12% of their contacts were initiated by the enemy, compared to the American average of 68%. The Australians were not just surviving, they were dominating. You would think American special forces would have jumped at this opportunity. The Australians were proving operation after operation that their methods worked. Their kill ratios were extraordinary. Some patrols were achieving 30-1 or even 50-1 casualty ratios. But military culture is more complicated than simple effectiveness. The resistance came from multiple directions. First, there was equipment. The U.S. Army had spent millions developing the M16. Suggesting that soldiers should take hacksaws to their rifles was essentially suggesting that the entire procurement system had made a mistake. And in the military, admitting mistakes is complicated. Second, there was doctrine. American infantry doctrine emphasized mobility and firepower. The idea that slower was better, that less ammunition was an advantage, that avoiding contact was preferable to winning contact. These concepts contradicted decades of American military thinking. Major Robert Howard, a Medal of Honor recipient who served with SOG, later reflected, "We were trained that Americans win through superior firepower and aggressive action. The Australian approach felt passive. It felt like we were hiding instead of fighting." It took me a long time to understand that invisibility is its own form of superiority. Third, and this is where it gets uncomfortable, there was pride. American Special Forces were the best in the world. The idea that they needed to learn from a smaller ally from soldiers who carried modified rifles and moved at a glacial pace was difficult for some operators to accept. General Abrams's cross-raining program became a careful dance. Some units embraced it. SOG's Command and Control North sent an entire team to train with 3 Squadron. They came back converts, immediately modifying their tactics. Other units refused. "We do not need to learn to be slow." One team leader reportedly said the tension peaked in July 1968 during a joint operation in the Longhai Hills. Then came Operation Portsea, and with it, the moment that would force even the most stubborn American commanders to admit the Australians were right. Operation Portsea was supposed to be a demonstration of Allied cooperation. Australian and American forces would conduct parallel operations in the Longhai Hills, a notorious VC stronghold. Host 1601-2126, 2203. The goal was to locate and destroy enemy supply caches. 2 patrols, same objective area, different approaches. The American patrol call sign winner was a 6-man SOG team. Experienced operators, multiple tours, excellent combat record. They had volunteered for the joint operation specifically to prove that American tactics could be just as effective as Australian methods. The Australian patrol call sign Wabi was led by Corporal Jack Kelly. 5 men, standard SAS loadout, cut-down rifles. Both patrols inserted on July 18, 1968. The objective, a suspected VC supply cache in a cave complex. Grid coordinates already identified through signals intelligence. Sidewinder moved aggressively. They knew where the cache was, so they pushed hard to reach it. 120 hours. Good tactical movement by American standards. They reached the objective area by 1300 hours. 4 hours after insertion, they found the cave complex, empty, worse, freshly abandoned. Cooking fire still warm, equipment scattered, obviously removed in haste. The VC had known they were coming. Sidewinder set up a defensive perimeter and radioed for instructions. The decision was made to extract the element of surprise was gone, and staying in the area risked ambush. They moved to the extraction point. At 1545 hours, they were ambushed anyway. 2 men wounded, 1 seriously. The team fought their way out with helicopter gunship support, but the mission was a complete failure. Wallaby Patrol, meanwhile, had been moving at their typical glacial pace. 4 hours after insertion, they had covered less than 400 meters. But they had noticed something. Fresh boot prints crossing their route. VC moving quickly within the last 2 hours. Instead of continuing to the objective, Corporal Kelly made a decision. He followed the tracks. For 6 hours, Wallaby Patrol tracked the VC. Not following directly on their trail, that is how you walk into ambushes, but paralleling it using the VC's own noise as cover for their movement. At 1900 hours, they found what the VC had been carrying from the cave complex. A new supply cache, hastily concealed, guarded by only 4 VC. Wabe observed for 90 minutes, photographed the cache, counted supplies, identified that this was not just supplies. It was a medical station with documents indicating it served multiple VC units. Then Kelly radioed the first and only radio call of the mission with the new coordinates. The cache was destroyed by airstrike at 2100 hours. The intelligence recovered from the documents led to 3 more operations that dismantled an entire VC supply network. One patrol had found nothing and taken casualties. The other had found a more valuable target and taken 0 casualties. The after-action report reached General Abrams' desk within 48 hours. His response was 2 words: "Tell me everything." The immediate impact was subtle. MV did not issue orders mandating Australian tactics. You cannot simply override decades of doctrine with a memo. Instead, what happened was more organic. Individual units started experimenting. So G teams and II Corps began moving slower. They taped their equipment more carefully. Some units operating in areas where command oversight was limited started modifying their weapons, not sawing barrels down officially, but removing flash suppressors, shortening stocks, anything to reduce the weapons profile. By late 1968, an unofficial Australian method was being taught at the SOG training site at Long Thon. Not formally, it was not in any manual, but veteran team leaders were passing on techniques: how to move silently, how to position ambushes by predicting enemy movement rather than reacting to it, how to use patience as a weapon. Captain Wallace became one of the most vocal advocates. He had gone from skeptic to believer, and he brought that conversion to every briefing he gave. Between June 1968 and December 1968, Australian SAS patrols in Phui Province recorded 403 enemy killed versus 3 Australian fatalities. That is a 134-to-1 kill ratio statistically, unprecedented in modern warfare. American Special Forces units that had adopted Australian tactics were showing improvement too. One SOG company that implemented slower movement and noise discipline saw their casualty rate drop 40% over 6 months, while their successful intelligence gathering increased. The modified rifles remained controversial. The U.S. Army never officially sanctioned cutting down M16s, and soldiers caught doing it could face equipment damage charges. But in the field, many team leaders looked the other way. After the war, the legacy became clearer. In the 1980s, when the U.S. military began developing new special operations doctrine, Australian techniques were formally incorporated. The Ranger Handbook started including sections on environmental adaptation that were almost word-for-word descriptions of SAS methods. SEAL team training incorporated Australian-style tracking and counter-tracking. Delta Force operators trained with Australian SASR counterparts, learning the patience-based approach to reconnaissance. The cut-down rifle concept evolved. While the M16 itself was never officially shortened, the development of the M4 carbine with its shorter 14.5 in barrel was directly influenced by the jungle warfare experience. The M4 is now the standard rifle for U.S. Special Operations Forces. But perhaps the most interesting legacy is philosophical. Lieutenant Colonel David Hackworth, one of the most decorated American officers in Vietnam, wrote in his memoir, "The Australians taught us something we should have known from the beginning in guerrilla warfare. The side that controls information wins. Being invisible is more valuable than being deadly. Being patient is more powerful than being aggressive. Modern American Special Operations Forces now teach techniques that would have been called crazy in 1968. Extreme noise discipline, modified weapons for specific environments, movement speeds that prioritize invisibility over speed. In 1989, 21 years after watching those Australians unload their butchered rifles at Nuatat, Colonel Jim Wallace stood in front of a class at Fort Bragg. He was teaching jungle warfare doctrine to a new generation of special forces. He held up 2 rifles, an M16 with a 20 in barrel, an M4 carbine with a 14.5 in barrel, now standard issue. This shorter weapon, he told the class, was developed because of lessons learned in Vietnam, specifically from Australian SAS operators who understood something we did not. In jungle warfare, invisibility matters more than firepower. A student raised his hand. "Sir, did you serve with the Australians?" Wallace smiled a complicated smile that held 20 years of memories of watching Python Patrol get torn apart while Ferret Patrol brought back perfect intelligence, of Sergeant Peters lying motionless for 7 hours with an ant biting his leg, of Corporal Kelly tracking VC for 6 hours without firing a shot, of his own stubborn certainty that the Australians were doing everything wrong right up until the moment he realized they were doing everything right. "I did," Wallace said, "and they taught me the most expensive lesson of my career, that sometimes the people you think are idiots are the ones who will save your life." He paused, looking at the faces of the young operators in front of him. Men who would deploy to jungles and mountains and deserts around the world, carrying weapons and doctrine shaped by lessons learned in Vietnamese jungles decades before. "Those modified rifles looked like they had been butchered in a garage," Wallace continued, "and in a way, they had been. But those Australians understood something fundamental. The best weapon is not always the newest technology or the heaviest firepower. Sometimes it is a philosophy." He set down the rifles. "In certain environments, invisibility matters more than lethality. Patience matters more than aggression. Being quiet matters more than being quick. The Australians knew that in 1968. It took us 3 months and too many casualties to learn it." Subwinter host, Gabor 1, 2026-22-3. Wallace looked at the modified rifles on the table one more time. "Do not make the same mistake we did. Do not assume that someone doing things differently is doing them wrong. Sometimes they are just solving a problem you have not figured out yet." The class was silent for a moment. Then they picked up their weapons and headed for the training range, moving slowly, deliberately, practicing techniques learned from 120 Australians with cut-down rifles who had operated in jungles half a world away decades before. The Green Berets, who had mocked those rifles in 1968, had learned their lesson the hard way, the ones who survived anyway. But because of them, because of their willingness to eventually admit they were wrong, to learn from allies they had dismissed, to change doctrine that had cost too many lives, the next generation did not have to learn it the same way. They learned it from a colonel with a complicated smile holding 2 rifles, teaching the most expensive lesson of his career. Thanks for watching. I hope this story showed how innovation is often proven in action. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true military history moments.